before a single bomb left a single wing, Iran had already lost the sky. That's not a dramatic exaggeration. That's the operational reality of what unfolded on February 28th. Because by the time explosions started appearing over hardened Iranian targets, the air defense network meant to stop them had been functionally dead for almost 2 hours. Radar nodes were blind, command links were severed. Interceptor pilots were either frozen on the runway or flying without the information they needed to survive, and then the aircraft that did all of that, nobody saw them coming. Today, we're going inside the strike package that made Operation Epic Fury work. Not just the weapons, not just the footage, but the actual architecture. Which jet did what, in what order, and why that sequence was the whole game, because this wasn't a bombing run. It was a choreographed, layered takedown of one of the most sophisticated air defense networks in the Middle East. And once you understand how the pieces fit together, you'll never look at a US airstrike headline the same way again. Let's rewind to the 72 hours before the strike, because that's when the real decisions were made. By February 26th, the Geneva talks on zero enrichment had collapsed. Iran walked. And within hours, U.S. Central Command shifted from contingency planning to execution mode. What followed wasn't a scramble. It was the activation of a package that had been quietly pre-positioned for weeks. 2 carrier strike groups were already in theater. The USS Abraham Lincoln in the northern Arabian Sea, the USS Gerald Ford in the eastern Mediterranean. Between them, they carried a combined air wing of over 130 aircraft, including FA-18 Super Hornets and EA-18G Growlers. Those weren't there by coincidence. Neither were the B-2 Spirits that had quietly staged out of Diego Garcia, or the B-1B Lancers that had moved into Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. F-22's Raptors from the 1st Fighter Wing had deployed to Nevatim Air Base in Israel. F-35s were distributed across multiple forward locations throughout the Levant, and the tanker fleet, KC-46s and KC-135s, had been surging into position for days, which is always the tell. You don't move that many tankers unless you're building for sustained high-tempo operations. The package was set. What happened next was execution. The strike didn't open with bombs. It opened with silence, and then with noise. The EA-18G Growler is the aircraft most people skip over in these breakdowns, and that's a mistake. Flying off the Gerald Ford in the eastern Mediterranean, Growler crews began suppressing Iranian early warning radar frequencies in the hours before H-hour. The Growler is essentially a flying electronic warfare suite. It doesn't need to physically destroy a radar to neutralize it. It can jam the frequencies, spoof the returns, and feed false data into a network until operators on the ground can no longer trust what they're seeing. That's what happened on the night of February 27th. Iranian radar operators weren't seeing nothing. They were seeing garbage. And garbage is arguably worse than nothing because it creates hesitation. At the same time, F-35 Lightning's IIs were already inside contested airspace. This is the part that's genuinely difficult to wrap your head around if you're used to thinking about fighters as aircraft that fly to the fight. The F-35 doesn't announce itself. Its radar cross-section is roughly the size of a metal golf ball, and it carries its weapons internally, which means there's no external signature from under the wings to give it away. While the Growlers were generating electronic noise from outside Iranian airspace, F-35s were threading through the gaps in the radar coverage, gaps that the Growlers had helped create, and building a real-time picture of the entire integrated air defense network from the inside. What F-35 pilots were doing in those hours wasn't just reconnaissance. The aircraft's onboard electronic warfare system, the AN/ASQ-239, was actively mapping emission sources, cataloging radar positions, and, in some cases, prosecuting high-priority nodes with air-to-ground munitions before the main package even arrived. When a radar site went dark, that data didn't stay in the cockpit. It fed into the broader network, to other F-35s, to the carriers, to the strike planners watching from combined air operations centers hundreds of miles away. By the time H-hour arrived, the U.S. had a more accurate picture of Iran's remaining air defenses than Iran did. With the radar picture fragmenting and Iranian command links degrading, the next problem was interceptors. Iran operates MiG-29s and Su-35s, and even a disorganized scramble of those aircraft into the strike corridor would create risk for the package. That's where the F-22 Raptor enters. 11 Raptors had been operating from Nevatim in the days before the strike. On the night of February 27th, they were already airborne and holding at altitude, above 50,000 feet, cruising at speeds that require no afterburner, with no contrails and no emissions detectable by ground-based radar. The Raptor carries its own AESA radar, the AN/APG-77, which can detect and track airborne threats at ranges that make a fair fight essentially impossible. Any Iranian interceptor that attempted to climb into the threat zone was already tracked, already targeted, and already at a lethal disadvantage before its pilot had a chance to react. The term for what the Raptors were doing is air dominance, and it's distinct from air superiority. Air superiority means you can operate in a space. Air dominance means the other side can't. On February 28th, Iranian pilots who were capable of flying chose not to because the airspace above them had been made tactically unsurvivable. That decision, to stay on the ground, was the Raptor doing its job perfectly. The most effective combat kill is the one that never happens. The F-16 Fighting Falcons assigned to the package played a complementary role. Operating at medium altitude, they provided SEAD support, suppression of enemy air defenses, using AGM-88 HARM missiles to prosecute any radar site that powered back up after the initial suppression wave. Iranian operators faced an impossible choice: turn on your radar and get a HARM in the face, or stay dark and lose the ability to guide your own surface-to-air missiles. Either way, the strike package wins. With the radar grid fractured and the interceptor threat neutralized, the heavy hitters came in. The B-2 Spirit had been airborne for over 14 hours before its weapons came off the rails. Flying from Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, a mission that covered thousands of miles each way, the B-2 carried GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, the only conventional weapon in the U.S. inventory capable of threatening deeply buried, hardened targets. Iran's most protected nuclear and command infrastructure was designed to survive near misses from conventional bombs. The GBU-57, at 30,000 pounds, is designed specifically to reach those targets. The B-2 didn't need a permissive environment because it generates almost no radar return at all. It flew through what remained of Iran's air defense network like it wasn't there, because for all practical purposes, it wasn't. The B-1B Lancers out of Al Udeid came in with a different profile. The B-1 is not a stealth aircraft, but by the time it arrived on target, stealth wasn't the requirement anymore. The electromagnetic environment had been so thoroughly degraded that the B-1's supersonic dash capability and its massive internal payload, up to 75,000 pounds of mixed ordnance, were the relevant attributes. B-1s hit distributed infrastructure targets, logistics nodes, and military production facilities that required volume rather than precision penetration. F-15E. Strike Eagles handled the mid-tier precision work. The Strike Eagle carries a combination of JDAM precision-guided bombs and standoff weapons like the JASSM-ER, and its crews are trained to work in complex, dynamic environments. The F-35s had already cleared and mapped the corridors, so the F-15Es were moving through airspace that had effectively been pre-sanitized. What would have been a high-risk tasking in a contested environment became not routine, because nothing about a combat strike is routine, but procedural in the best sense of that word. The FA-18 Super Hornets off both carriers covered time-sensitive targets that emerged during the strike. Their role was responsiveness. With Tomahawk volleys already threading through pre-mapped routes and ballistic missiles being tracked in real time, the Super Hornets gave commanders the ability to redirect firepower quickly as the picture evolved. Here's where the script usually ends. Bombs fell, targets were destroyed, Iran's air defenses were suppressed. But there's an aircraft in this package that hasn't been mentioned yet, and its role is the most misunderstood of all. The A-10 Warthog. In a strike of this profile, the A-10 doesn't go in first and it doesn't carry bunker busters. What it does, and what it did in the follow-on hours of epic fury, is provide persistent, low-altitude fire support in the aftermath of the initial strike when Iranian ground forces and mobile air defense units began repositioning. The A-10's GAU-8 Avenger cannon and its ability to carry a wide mix of ordnance make it extraordinarily effective against mobile, dispersed threats that don't show up cleanly on a pre-strike targeting list. Once the F-22s had cleared the sky and the integrated air defense network had been broken, the environment became permissive enough for the A-10 to do what it does better than anything else alive: stay low, stay slow, and find things that are trying to move. It's not a glamorous role, but in the hours after the initial strike, it was a necessary one. Step back from the individual airframes for a moment and look at what just happened as a system. An EA-18G softened the electromagnetic environment from outside the threat radius. F-35s entered the gap and dismantled the radar grid from the inside while feeding live data to everyone else. F-22s sealed the sky and made interceptor opposition operationally irrational. F-16 kept any surviving radar from powering back up. Then B-2s arrived invisibly at the most hardened targets. B-1Bs saturated distributed infrastructure, F-15Es worked the precision corridor, and Super Hornets handled the dynamic fight. Then the A-10 held the ground phase. No single one of those aircraft could have done what all of them did together. The F-22 can dominate the sky, but it doesn't penetrate a bunker. The B-2 can reach deeply buried targets, but it doesn't suppress mobile SAM systems. The A-10 can break up a ground repositioning effort, but it can't survive a functional integrated air defense network. Every platform in that package depended on the others doing their job first. Here's the question that every adversary war planner is working through right now. If this architecture works as demonstrated, if fifth-generation aircraft can blind, dominate, and sanitize a threat environment this quickly, what does a credible counter look like? Can you build a radar network resilient enough to survive this kind of electromagnetic assault? Can you disperse your interceptors in a way that defeats the Raptors' first look, first shot advantage? Can you harden enough targets to absorb a GBU-57? Maybe. But the real challenge isn't defeating any one piece of this package, it's that the pieces protect each other. You can't get to the B-2 without first solving the F-22. You can't neutralize the F-35s without powering up the radar that brings the harm. The architecture is designed to make every answer to one problem create a worse problem somewhere else. Operation Epic Fury will be studied, picked apart, and war-gamed for years. But the headline isn't the smoke rising over hardened targets. The headline is that a fully integrated fifth-generation strike package executed a multi-phase air campaign in a single operational cycle in real time against a peer-level air defense network. And it worked. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching and see you in the next episode.